What is going on, y'all? I am KM Best with a mic close to my face this time. He is Lamby series. We are 8 cubes, and we are, wow, the first point did it correctly.
Yes.
All right, we are ready to talk about the most important topics in Snap. I have a nomination for what I think is probably the best deck in Marvel Snap, and that's a Loki Elsa. I know Lamby does not think it's the best deck in Snap. I'll go through why I do believe that Loki Elsa is at the very least, a strong contender for it. Outside of my own success with the list, it is a deck that has just answers for a lot of different situations. It's a Loki deck that is not reliant on Loki. It's not reliant on cost discounts. It's much more able to actually do that turn 6 Loki just to pump your collector alongside a couple other cards kind of game plan. But I think most importantly, what makes the deck strong is it runs both Luke Cage and Mobius M. Mobius, and it is able to do that because of the power of the other cards in the deck, because the other cards in the deck can carry so much weight in terms of putting points on the board. You get to run a lot of really important proactive tech cards in this metagame. I think Luke Cage and Mobius are part of what makes basically any deck good into a variety of different matchups. And you're going to get free wins off of running those cards a decent amount of the time. They're just that strong. And I guess my question would be, I don't really know what that says about the meta. What does it say about the meta that it's just like, all right, what's the best deck I can play with like as many tech cards as I can fit? And that's a little odd. It's an odd meta. I'm not sure we've had that kind of meta before. But I do draw a comparison to like the old Shang-Chi and Enchantress decks where it's like, well, yeah, you just play the best Shang-Chi Enchantress deck and you go from there. Is it possible Luke Cage Mobius is now like the proactive Shang-Chi Enchantress?
Right. So I think the meta, before we go into the whole like Luke and a Mobius thing, I think the meta is warping a lot around like how to not lose to Alioth, right? Like most people are just trying their best to not lose to an Alioth, which means they need to maintain initiative. And you see like things popping up like Vision, trying to just try and beat like Alioth things, so you don't have to actually play physical stats on like the Alioth lane on turn 6. So I think that's where the direction the meta is heading right now. For when it comes to Loki Elsa, I played the deck quite a bit recently just to test again. I think it's still very strong because like there's a lot of like cheap cards that you can play together with Elsa. Just get little buffs, then you finish off with like Collector Loki stuff. My problem with that deck is that I feel like, okay, personally, I feel like it just puts out a little bit less points than Bounce, which is like about the same thing, a token based deck, little guys based deck that like puts out a lot of points. Of course, with the Loki deck, you have the room to run a lot of tech cards without compromising your integrity of your deck, right? Because like a lot of it revolves
Yeah.
around just Collector Loki and protecting that. So I think when it comes to like being an overall more like stable deck, like less vulnerable and like less like weak, I think Loki is the better deck when it comes to stability. I don't deny. But I guess when my take on Bounce is just that I think it's a deck that just scales much higher. But we've talked about this before, a little bit before the recording, which is there's a good chance that I'm winning a lot with Bounce just because that I play the deck well. Doesn't mean that it's like for everybody, and I agree. But yeah, that's my take on the situation right now.
What I find most compelling about Loki is I know the human spider doesn't even own Elsa, and he still top aided the impulse thing with Loki, which is just like, oh, that card's still really, really strong, huh? And it's like, oh, that's wait, no, sorry, not top aided, day 2. Their format
Yeah.
is odd. But I remember being pretty impressed with that because it's like, oh, you're just like playing the old Loki deck. So I think a lot of people, when a new card comes out, they're like, oh, well, I have to put that in everything. And, you know, maybe it makes the deck better. I personally believe that it does. But I don't think the old versions of the deck are actually unplayable at this point.
I think it depends on the build as well. Like if your build is
Mhm.
less centered around like the one cost cards, and more like to the old build where you're just going Sentinel and like even like Coulson, right? You don't actually need the Elsa because the Elsa really benefits from playing a lot
Yeah.
of cards early and buffing your stuff. So when the human spider did well in that tournament, with his previous build, I think firstly the guy is just good at the game, we have to admit. And I think if you're just good at the game, you take any like maybe slightly less optimized build, you probably will still do decently well.
Yeah, I think part of the reason I'm enjoying Loki Elsa so much is just I have, you know, what, like 800 games of Loki under my belt. And so I get how to play that deck pretty well. And Loki Elsa is not very far removed from classic Loki. Speaking of decks that may be back, Thanos. So Johnson has a Thanos deck, and it did very well in the Impulse tournament in his hands. I know Torikun had some success with it. I know Swen had some success with it. I am still a little bit doubtful about Thanos's overall quality in the metagame. I'm going to be 100% honest. I don't know if this is a case of, so and so can win with a ham sandwich rather than like genius deck building, but it's the best Thanos has done since the Soulstone nerf for sure. It's the most consistent results Thanos has ever put up. Where are you at on this? Because I know you're a huge Thanos lover, but I also know you are, a little bit out on it the same way I am.
Right. So, firstly, yes, I'm indeed a huge Thanos lover because I have 46 Thanos splits. If that doesn't explain Thanos lover, I don't know what that means. Secondly, okay, so the thing about what Johnson did with his Thanos build is he did a very simple thing, which is what W did in the past as well. It used to be like Time Stone Psylocke into like a 4 cost on 5, which is like Prof. Then you play old Spider-Man to lock out the other lane, and then you just finish with whatever, right? So now there's no old Spider-Man, but the Psylocke and Time Stone remain, but you have the Professor X, and then now you finish with Alioth. So Alioth is that new like end game win condition for like the other lane that you're not locking out yet. It's the same concept. So I think the deck is literally the same, just that like your final turn win condition is like a little bit different. And based on that, I just want to say that I don't think Thanos is tier 1. I think like the people doing well with it just know how to play Thanos. It's like the same as me with Bounce, right? Like I think it's the best because I know what to do with it. But like Thanos, I feel like the players that are doing well with it, I get the idea of the deck. The build is strong, it's solid, the idea is there. But a lot of people doing well with it, I believe, is because they just understand Thanos very well. So in terms of like a generic top tier deck, Thanos might not be there yet. Like it's not like as like clear cut as Shuri Soren, everybody can just win with Shuri Soren, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that clear cut. But I think with the way the deck is being built, like from what we've seen, the whole like ramp into Prof and then Alioth thing, I think it's a good shell to start on and progress from there.
Yeah, that was the original pitch for Thanos post Soulstone, right? Was all right, well, look, they obviously had to nerf that because we were going to go Professor X into Dino into Alioth, which is like kind of unbeatable. But the issue with having that be your specific plan is you're still a Thanos deck and you get that less reliably than other decks doing that, right? Like that's the issue with reducing the consistency of cards like Soulstone, reducing the consistency of the deck is that you don't get to do that plan as consistently as, say, an Elsa deck gets to do Elsa Vision into Alioth, right? Like, that is something that, like, Elsa Brood gets to do basically a decent amount of the time, and that's more than you get to do with Thanos. Another thing with Thanos that I think is a little bit confusing is, are we still turn 1 snapping Mind Stone? Is that a thing we can do still? Because I feel like if we're not turn 1 snapping Mind Stone, I almost don't want to play the deck. But I've won so many games against Thanos's when they turn 1 snap the Mind Stone that I honestly don't even know if it's the right play anymore.
So, yeah, I've played like a few hours of Thanos just to make sure like I'm on the same page as everyone else. And yeah, the core idea is strong, but that whole turn 1 Mind Stone snap thing is very interesting because firstly, we used to always turn 1 snap Mind Stone because it just gets you through your whole deck. Right now, the chance of Mind Stone drawing Soul and Power Stone together is actually a lot higher than people think. It's like actually very high, quite high. Like in if you have like a significant amount of games under your belt. So the problem is Mind Stone is still like the deck's like turn 1 power play. So I think you still have to snap turn 1 Mind Stone and accept that if you just drop power and soul, you're kind of screwed. But if you don't snap the turn 1 Mind Stone, you're losing like snapping equity with the deck. So TLDR, the deck is legit worse because you can draw soul and power together. Yeah, but
it's actually interesting because like they normally try to balance by chopping the bottom off. And what they actually did was they chopped a little bit of the top off here when they changed that because the top is the Mind Stone, right? And now they made the Mind Stone worse because it can draw you stones that don't draw any cards. This is a little bit of, I would say, maybe a celebration here. I haven't seen a Galactus in days. And I just wanted to say, great job. Big fan. I'm a huge fan of the balance changes that resulted in that. Definitely enjoying actually playing Marvel Snap instead of Marvel Galactus. Are you happy with this? Do you think Galactus should be around in the high level metagame? Where are you at on it?
I I mean, I don't miss not seeing Galactus. Like, I don't miss it at all. But like, I think like you're right. The only Galactus I've seen in the last like 72 hours is like one with like a Hobgoblin build that's like trying to get it
Mhm.
off still at even though it's a 6/5. I don't miss the card. I think having no Galactus in the meta game, because recently I was casting a tournament, right? The meta is wide open. There's like so many viable decks now that I think half of those insta lose to all Galactus. So like yeah, I think it's good for diversity in the game. I do want a viable Galactus deck to be in the meta, but it's very hard to balance, right? Because like if it's a viable Galactus deck in the meta, if it becomes too viable and then you cannot play like four of the other decks that you used to play because it becomes too viable, then like that's also a problem, right? So I think Galactus is very difficult to get correct in the right like sweet spot, because if it's too easily to pull off, you can't play the game. But if it's
Yeah.
too difficult to pull off, the deck disappears. So the sweet
Yeah.
spot is very hard to find for Galactus.
Yeah, it makes me wonder. I still remember this. I got a hot take on my hot takes video that was like, Second Dinner wants to delete Galactus, but they just don't have the fortitude to do so. And I kind of wonder if that's not, the correct solution to a card like that, where it's like, man, I really wish you could go back in time and not make this card, because it's either really good and everywhere or really bad and totally unplayable.
Yeah, that card is funny because I actually like the idea of like just never creating Galactus. But the thing
Yeah.
is, it has created like it has a fan base. Like Galactus has a legit
Yes.
fan base right now, and you can't just get rid of the fan base now that they've been exposed to the card. But having said that, like I agree with your hot take right there, which is like if Galactus was never created, if this like idea was never created, I think it's still actually okay for the game. Like the game doesn't need to know this idea exists, right?
Yes. Speaking of unmaking everything, Alioth is a card that everyone is mad about right now. It's probably the most consistent complaint in Marvel Snap. My impression of Alioth is actually that it's like a totally fair card, but if you wanted to nerf it, what we came up with was you bring it to 6/4, you can bring Captain Marvel back up to 5 power, and then you have like Captain Marvel, Silk, Doombots all able to like legitimately counter the card in some way. I do think that that is a totally viable solution. I just think that there's a lot of situations where Alioth isn't the only card that beats you, but since it is the card that beats you, you really feel it, if that makes any sense. I don't know how many situations I come up against where it's like, I play an Alioth and it's like, then chat will be like, yeah, Chavez would have won there. It's like, oh, that's probably true. That's like, there's a lot of situations where it's like I play an Alioth and it's like, I could have just won on power. I could have just like played a Doctor Doom or whatever. But I think Alioth specifically feels bad in a way that makes people like not think about things like that, right? Like when you get Alioth, you're just like, oh my god, I got Alioth. You're not thinking, okay, I also lost to a Doctor Doom there. You have to like actually force yourself to look for stuff like that. And I think that is a major issue that the card has, is that it feels really, really bad to lose to. And we're going to get to this a little bit later, but I think that's like something that a lot of priority win cons have in common, because when you have a priority win con, it is the kind of card that invalidates turn 6, and invalidating turn 6, that feels bad. And at least when you get your turn 6 invalidated through a bunch of Doom bots putting more power out than you feel like you still played the game. But when you get your turn 6 invalidated through something like this, it's like, oh, I didn't even do anything. I didn't even get to do anything. So what are your thoughts on Alioth right now?
All right, so based on your just last statement, then I have like a legit point that I think people need to think about, which is that like, okay, so you lose to like Doom and Doom bots, right? Then you don't complain as much as losing to Alioth, because Alioth makes you feel like you don't actually play the game. But if you think
Yep.
about it from another point of view, right? Like if you knew you could lose to Doom bots, it's the same as knowing that you could lose to Alioth, right? It's like you know that it's coming. It's just that which one do you actually beat? Like it's like people complain that they play Alioth in this lane and they kill all my cards. I couldn't do anything. But it's the same, right? Like if you didn't have enough stuff previously in like a Storm lane, you also knew you were gonna die to a Doom bot. Like regardless. So it's the same thing. It's like there's this inevitability with some of these cards, but it's just your perception. It's just that I guess because Alioth actually deletes your cards and you see it, you're just like, oh no, I didn't play a card. But it's the same. Like if you didn't have enough cards in an off lane that is like closed off by Storm, and then they play Doom, you're still dying. It's the same. Just that your cards don't actually disappear. It's the
Yeah,
same. It's just how
you're
you
still
look at
eating
it.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think Alioth as a card, funnily enough, we have this thing called the Alioth brain. I don't know. I don't know where this came out from, but like people have been
What do you
talking to
mean
me
you
about the
don't know where
Alioth.
it came from? Alioth brain? It's the same thing as leader brain.
Oh, okay. It's this, oh, it's from that. Okay. But
Yeah.
yeah, they said Alioth brain because now on turn 6, everybody and their like family just wants to Alioth you. You can
Yes.
literally like you literally can win games because you know they want to Alioth you, and you just make the play like you said, play a Chavez somewhere else, and you
Yep.
just win because you know they will want to Alioth you. It's just like a okay, I gotta Alioth them, I gotta Alioth
Yep.
them, even though it's not actually correct. It's quite hilarious.
100% locked up, baby.
Yes,
Yeah. Oh man. Send this to your friend who has Alioth brain. It's a serious disease.
it is.
Let's talk about Clog. I see a lot of people espousing Clog decks recently. I will be honest with you. I feel like Clog is actually pretty poorly positioned because most games against Elsa decks, there's going to be at least one lane that you can't clog because they're just kittying and Elsaing a kitty in that lane. And they get to pick whatever that lane is, and it's not always the obvious one, which puts you in like mind games for whether your deck even works, right? Because it's like, all right, I'm gonna play this green goblin over on this Angela lane. It's like, nope, they filled it up because they wanted to get the buff on a kitty. Oh, okay. Well, that sucks. That lane is full now, and I have a green goblin sitting on my side of the board. And that's like a bit of a fanciful example, but like if people are playing these decks right and go like, 1-drop, 2-drop, Elsa kitty, it will fill it up, right? Like if they're going, like for example in the Loki deck, Maria Hill, Angela, Elsa, Kitty, I will do that a lot of the time. And it's like, oh, well, nice green goblin, nice debris. It's actually filling up more of your stuff than it is of mine. It's a very interesting dynamic, I feel like. And that's to say nothing of the decks that are running, Falcon to pick up your debris rocks and the guy you send over, the hood. Like there's a lot of weirdly compelling counterplay to Clog decks in the metagame right now that make me a little bit surprised that they're around, but they're doing okay. And I'm happy to see that archetype succeed. I will say, I think Black Widow right now might actually be at an all-time high because of how many decks need to do like really specific early game things. So I'm kind of in on Black Widow right now. I don't hate it. The more Lokis there are, the less I'm into trying to do like master mold type stuff. It's good until it's bad, basically. Like if they have the Loki in hand, you're in a really terrible spot when you give them a bunch of free cards. And other than that, I think the Clog decks are, I've been more impressed with them than I should, but I think it's maybe just not a reliable thing that I would recommend to someone trying to climb. But maybe if you wanted to mess around after Infinite and experiment, I think it would be pretty solid.
Right. So I have very strong opinions about Clock because, like, okay, so I'm very in touch with the tournament scene, right? And like for the last 6 months, there hasn't been a single time where a Clock has won anything because,
Correct.
very simply, Clock decks are okay. On ladder, it's decent because Clock decks are only actually good because you don't know they're gonna clock you. It's like
Yes.
legit because like if you know what they do, right? The Clock deck is essentially a deck with very little points, right? And the only way they win is steal or scam a lane where you didn't expect to be like full at that point in time. This is very mitigated if you know that they are trying to do it because they only can win by trying to do it. So clock decks are, I feel like, better if you don't know they are a clock deck, which is, I guess, ladder. It's fine to a certain extent. Sometimes in conquest it's fine as well because like there's like certain tech slots that you can play and stuff like that. I guess clock did get a little bit of a boost also because of Alioth, right? Because if lanes are full, there's like
Yes.
only one place that can be played into and then you Alioth it. So that one kind of does make sense. But in general, the whole clock strategy is very reliant on like your opponent not knowing that lane is full this turn, which is like because you play a goblin there and it will be full. But like if you know that their whole point is they want to make sure you cannot play cards, like you said, Kitty Pride, even just playing Jeff, sometimes preemptively playing everything in the one lane, just like perma clogging yourself with like mid-level stats like 15 points, like, and then they play a goblin there and they die because they can't send it over. You know that kind of thing. Like you
Yeah.
just know, you just know that they are clock deck and like the matchup becomes easier for like every deck. So that's my opinion on clock.
That is a very informed one, actually. Speaking of Clog decks, Man Thing is coming out, and I am more excited for him than most. Man Thing, of course, a 4-cost, 5 power unit with an ongoing ability that says 1, 2, and 3 cost cards at this location get -2 power, which seems very good in a clogged deck. You know, you give them the hood, you give them a green goblin, you give them some debris rocks, and suddenly Man Thing is just like this enormous lane winning monster who is just like, you know, generally dominating that area. Even if it's giving your Viper and your debris rocks some minus power too, it's still just a big guy in a lane. And it also sort of works retroactively a little bit. Like you could put the Man Thing there and then put debris rocks in there to fill it up, things like that. And it does go very, very well into this current metagame where, like, you know, your opponent plays a Brood and suddenly all the Broodlings get -2 power. Like, it's not nothing. It's a pretty powerful effect. The worry I have with it is Luke Cage. Luke Cage is already at an all-time high thanks to the power of Shadow King right now. And I don't know if this card can get out of the gate if everyone is playing Luke Cage.
I don't think Man Thing will be like game breaking the way Loki is, or I don't think it'll be as powerful the way Elsa currently is right now. But I have hope for this card. I think I have like a very positive outlook on this card. So because firstly, like you said, it's perfect in a clock deck. Luke Cage, of course, is the biggest problem for this card. But at the end of the day, it's the same thing, right? Like if you play this card and there's a counter for it, if they have the counter, then your card becomes worse. But the thing is, Man Thing is not bad just cause they actually put Luke Cage on the board. It's a 4/6, right? Like
4/5.
it's stats at the 4/5, right? But at the end of the day, I don't think it's actually a bad card. It's actually insanely strong if they don't run Luke Cage or if they don't draw Luke Cage. And if they do, right, it's just all right. If they snap you when they see the Man Thing, that means they have the Luke Cage, and then you just play accordingly, that kind of thing. So I don't think it's gonna be a game-breaking card, but I think it does benefit Clock a bit. Because there are certain decks that also can't run Luke Cage, right? Because no space. So like if you hit those matchups, then the Man Thing will just like blow it out. So yeah, I'm optimistic about the card. Just that it's not gonna be game breaking. I'm very sure. Just optimistic.
It just has a lot of stats, right?
Yeah.
Like you just dump that in a lane with like a couple small guys in it, and it's like, oh, that's like a 4/10, 4/9, 4/11.
Yeah.
Strong, big guy. Next up, there's been a lot of, I guess we'll say, discontent with the anniversary event being run by Newverse, which is, for those who are unaware, and I wouldn't blame you for being unaware because it wasn't really announced or promoted anywhere, Newverse, the publisher of the game, is running an event online wherein you get points for spending money and then you get rewards for that. It's basically like a reward point system. And I think a lot of people sort of object to it on moral grounds. Just like, look, man, you shouldn't be running events that are just like entirely about spending money. I believe the final prize is 20,000 points. And if I'm not mistaken, that would be $200 spent over the course of the season. But I could be mistaken because I believe it's like you spend $5, that's 500 points. So it's not like the world's most unattainable goal, but it's weird to gate to have your anniversary be focused on spending money. So I will say, from what I understand, I think that this event is entirely developed and conceived by the publishing team, Newverse, not Second Dinner. And I wouldn't be surprised if Second Dinner had some anniversary celebration things coming as well, because it has been a year since Marvel Snap came out. I'd be a little surprised if they didn't, actually. But I do wonder, like, what this speaks to in terms of, like, you know, the Newverse people are just able to be like, yeah, we're gonna run an event here, and that is just entirely something they can do, I guess. And I'm a little interested to know, like, what the behind the scenes is on who is allowed to do stuff like that, because it's a very, like, if this is just like Newverse running an event and Second Dinner didn't have anything to do with it, then that's weird, right? But if Second Dinner did have something to do with it, then it's like, oh, okay, I guess you guys are cool with just having the event be spending money. The reason I don't think they had anything to do with it is because there was no like announcements of this in any way. It just showed up one day, and I think that they would at least, you know, tweet it if it was their thing. But what do I know?
Yeah, I got a feeling that this wasn't like something that was meant to be heavily publicized, or like couldn't be heavily publicized. I'm not sure why, but like I'm looking at the thing right now. It's yeah,
Mhm.
like you said, it's $200 for the full
Yeah.
rewards approximately. I mean, the rewards are good. Like if you are someone that generally spends money anyway, this is like complete bonus, right? Like there's no downside.
Yeah.
But like yeah, I think for the majority of the players who are like maybe F2P or like not 100% like will or whatever, like they will not hit that
I mean,
$200
I don't know. I don't think I'm gonna hit
signature.
that, right? Like I have because I spent in previous months, so I have a stockpile of gold, right? I'm
Mhm.
actually a whale, but I get nothing out of this.
Yeah. It's just additional. I guess it's like if you want to get these like exclusives, then sure, spend more now. It's like if you are someone that spends a lot, you will eventually hit this amount anyway. But like they are incentivizing you to spend it like during this period, you know. So I don't know if that's
Two hundred
actually
dollars a month, though. Like,
it's a lot. For a game, it's a lot. Yeah.
yeah, that's like a fairly obscene amount. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, oh god, that's really
Yeah.
what you expect from us. Jeez, I don't even know if I like. Here's the thing. Here's the other thing is, I don't even know if I can spend $200 this month. Like, not like in terms of do I have $200 to spend on a mobile cards in a video game, but like, I mean, I feel like I'd have to buy every single bundle like for dollars and then also like buy some gold. I don't even understand how you get to $200. Like
Yeah. I
I
think
don't even I don't get it.
the the easiest way is based on what I'm seeing in the shop is you buy the 8,000 gold thing times two, and then you hit 10K. That's literally what I think
Yeah.
is the easiest way to do it. But no, obviously that's not something that everyone will do, and like most people will not do that. But yeah, just interesting to look at. I honestly had no idea, or like didn't expect this to be like the kind
Yeah.
of promotion that will be going out. You know, like
Yeah.
just spend money to get additional rewards thing. I didn't realize this was a thing, but like yeah, it is
Yeah,
what it is, right?
yes. And what it is damn, I wish they were doing something better.
I do wish that there was an alternative route to doing this as well, but yeah,
Yeah.
you know.
Next up, we touched on this a little bit at the Alioth section here. And what I want to talk about is I think there's a group of people who will never be satisfied with any kind of priority win condition. And what I mean by priority win condition, old leader, old arrow, current Alioth. There is a group of people for whom there is no satisfiable way for a card like that to exist. And I think that's a little bit weird because I think that a card like that needs to exist in order to counterbalance things like bounce, or it's like we talk a lot about bounce and like how incredibly powerful it is that you get to choose where you get to allocate your points on the final turn of the game, right? You get to choose where to do that. And the fact that there is a card that can just say, ah, no, you don't. You don't get to do that is actually pretty important to balance. People tend to focus a lot more on the priority win cons in terms of feel bads than they do on things like just a million points out of a Sarah, right? But like when people complained about Shang-Chi, they were complaining about that same thing, which is like people in Marvel Snap do not like when they get interacted with. I think that's the fundamental thing that I'm getting at here. People in Marvel Snap think there are, like, to me, interaction is also putting points on the board. Like, to me, putting points on the board is interaction. But I think to a lot of people, there's like a hard line between my opponent put more points on the board than me and my opponent played Shang-Chi, Alioth, Arrow, Leader, and it felt unfair, right? And I guess I'm trying to figure out if you are one of those people, is there any acceptable prio deck win con? Like, that isn't terrible, right? Because like I feel like what I'm gonna get is a bunch of suggestions for cards that are terrible and never win games, and thus are not actually prio deck win cons, right? Like, oh, you could totally have current arrow. Okay, that card sucks, right? Like you could totally have current leader. That card's not great either, right? Like it's okay. But like if you want the deck to actually kind of exist, right? Like a deck that is focused on taking priority and then slamming the door shut, you need that deck to have something good at the top end, right? And for a while that was leader, for a while that was arrow, for a while that was wave plus doom. Now it's Alioth. And it's like, okay, well, it's got to be something because you keep nerfing these cards. There needs to be something for this. And it's clear the devs understand that. Like the Alioth, in my view, is an attempt to make fixed arrow or fixed leader, depending on how you look at it. But you kind of run into the same issues, which is people just don't like having their turn 6 invalidated. They just don't like it. And if you're going to do that, then, maybe you just have to suck it up. Maybe you just have to be like, look, we know you're going to be mad at this deal if you're second dinner.
Yeah, so the funny thing is when you talked about the whole interaction thing, I just couldn't hold it in because like at the end of the day, card games are about interaction, right? You want to like be able to react and respond to your opponent's cards. And like honestly, Aero, Alioth, and like maybe even Leader in the past were actually cards that let you respond. It's actually interactivity, which is the point of a card games, right? You interact with your opponent's stuff. Like personally, if Alioth didn't exist, my bounce win rate would be like even way higher. But the thing is, it has to exist because like a lot of my games are lost to Alioth. Correct? Am I complaining about it? No, because if Alioth didn't exist, I'll just be doing two broken things, that kind of thing. So I feel like if Alioth didn't exist, people will start complaining about bounce, right? But because Alioth exists,
I don't even
people
think they
start
would.
complaining about.
I'm serious. I don't think they would.
No, I think they will because like they'll be like, oh, I have no way to stop like 30 points on the final turn because Alioth didn't exist, that kind of thing. So
I just don't think so. I think what would happen is I think basically people don't complain about stuff like that the same way. People complain about getting invalidated way more than they complain about just losing on points. Way more. I just don't think people would be mad at bounce. I don't think people would be mad at it.
The thing is, like, getting invalidated because of Alioth is simply because the opponent tried to interact with you with a card, right? It's like a literal turn 6 win condition. So people are getting mad that they are getting interacted with. And I'm like, isn't that the point of playing card games? It's to interact with your opponent, right? You're not a solitaire. You're not solitaire. So like, I don't know.
I get it. I just like we've had bounce be the best deck before, and there was not nearly the level of hate as there was for like Arrow, Leader, Alioth. It just there wasn't.
That's true. Yeah.
Like I think there's like
I just think like interaction is important, and like Alioth, people might argue that like it's not interacting because it just deletes the turn, but you do know that reaching up, going up, ending up on that turn 6 situation where you just straight up die to Alioth is sort of like preventable, right? Like there are a lot of things you can do.
Staying in the game.
Yeah, like staying in the game or like turn 1 to 5 if you know you will die to a turn 6 Alioth. There are like things you can do. There are placements. There are like 3 locations, guys. So like, I don't think it's I think interaction is important. Alioth actually does interact, so that's my take.
I just like I think one of the things that I'm sort of coming to terms with is that Marvel's, because like I know when I talked to Glenn said something about like, hey, I actually think Marvel Snap is at its best when it's both players doing their cool thing, right? It's just both players doing the cool thing, right? But I also think that there is a solid contingent of players, a vocal minority, I would say, who for them the cool thing is Galactus,
up to
Alioth. Right? Yeah. Like the cool thing is like being like, I feel like I'm 100% locked to win here. And that's the cool thing, right? Yeah, here's a thought. Do you think that old Arrow would have more counterplay currently than Alioth does?
Oh yeah, definitely, man. Because like every deck's a spamage deck. There's so many spamage decks right now. Like old Arrow versus Brute Apps is the most useless card in the world, for example. See?
So this is our official take. Bring back old Arrow.
Sure, let's go.
Official take of 8 cubes. If you want to do a priority win condition, bring back old Arrow. It's time. It's time to bring her back.
Let's go.